Good morning, everybody. As we're getting ready to jump into the 2024 gardening season, I thought now might be a good time to revisit what worked well and not so well in my 2023 Ohio garden. So my successes and failures from the 23 gardening season. Now, this topic was a suggestion from one of you lovely viewers, so thank you for that. Now, let's jump right into the successes. The first big win for 23, more hügelkultur. And not just hügelkultur, but I've developed a hybrid method of hügelkultur trench composting that has worked really, really well for us. Now, I started building traditional hügelkultur beds several years ago, and I loved this method. They're an excellent solution for poor quality soil and poor drainage areas. But over the last couple of years, my tactic has morphed into more this hybrid approach. So kind of a combination of trench composting and hügelkultur. I dig trenches first. I like to make them about 3 to 4 feet deep and wide. And I either dig by hand, or in this case at my parents' where we're making a lot of hügelkultur beds, my husband was able to borrow a tractor and dig the trenches. And I basically just fill them up over the course of a year or so. I always start with largest chunks of wood, ideally wood that has started to break down already. But then on top of that, I toss basically anything that one would put in the compost. Smaller woody debris, kitchen scraps, spent plants from the garden, sticks, leaves, grass clippings, hay or straw, shredded newspaper, etc. Again, this is typically over the course of a full year, so I might dig the trenches in the spring, put down the wood right away, and then over the course of the season, throw all of our composted material in it. Then the following spring, I like to add a layer of manure if I have some on hand, and then I backfill with that original dirt that I took out of the trench. And then as soon as I'm done backfilling, I can plant. I usually either opt for fruits and vegetables, or if I'm not quite ready to plant my cash crops there yet, I'll just do a cover crop for the time being. This has worked beautifully, and I'm constantly scoping out places where I can dig more of these trenches for hügel composting. Gardening world is one of the few worlds where more poop is considered a win. But if you've seen some of my other videos, especially those on improving clay soil, you may already know that manure is one of my all-time favorite soil amendments and fertilizers. In the past, I've typically used cow manure and a small amount of chicken manure because that's what we were able to get access to. But in 23, I started diversifying, adding sheep and rabbit to the mix and constantly seeking out reliable sources for clean manure. Now, I'll try not to wax poetic about poop, but it really has made a nearly miraculous difference in my garden. Nature's perfect soil amendment. It feeds the soil microbiome, which in turn feeds my plants more efficiently. It improves soil structure, encourages the presence of critters like earthworms, and more. My preference is to add a heaping helping each spring, but at the very least, I try to always add it to any new garden beds I'm creating. Now, unfortunately, it seems to be increasingly difficult to find sources of clean manure or manure from animals who have not been fed hay or put out to pasture in areas where persistent herbicides have been used. So finding ways to source more clean manure and figuring out ways to keep more of my own animals to supply my own poop is a big win. Now, if you really pressed me for what I felt the biggest win of the 23 gardening season was, I'd probably have to pick changing the layout and accessibility of the garden. When we initially fenced in the garden, only one entry point was built in, and I didn't have the foresight to make sure it was wide enough to easily accommodate my wheelbarrow and garden wagon. So early in 23, I made some changes to the layout, swinging the fencing out and expanding the garden and adding this nice large gate. This one relatively small change made such a difference. Now, related to this, another win was adding more of these cattle panel trellises. I originally only had these 2 and added 2 more in early 23. These arches are so easy to make and so versatile. The more of them I add, the more stuff I find to grow up them. The nice thing about growing vertically like this is you get a lot of production in a little footprint, which saves room in the garden. This also makes for healthier plants because you're getting them up off the ground and improving air circulation. And in my opinion, it makes for a more visually interesting and aesthetically pleasing garden, and provides little pockets of shade to take respite under during the hottest months of the summer. I'm already planning where I can put more for this year. Another win, less garden cleanup in the fall. More benefits for the garden, less work for me. A win all around. I used to spend a significant amount of time and energy cleaning up the vegetable garden in the fall. So getting rid of every last plant and scrap of plant debris, making sure that the beds were pristine and there was nothing left, so I would basically have a blank slate come the spring. Over the years, I came to realize the critical importance of leaving the soil covered, so I transitioned my methods to using cover crops, leaf mulch, sometimes hay or straw to cover all of my beds in the fall. I also changed to cutting plants off at ground level to leave the roots in the soil rather than yanking plants out, roots and all. Now this year, kind of as a happy accident, it was really out of necessity. I did not have the time to get out here and clean this year. I left a lot more stuff in place than I ever have. But I'm actually really digging the way this has worked out. Leaving sunflowers and my millet cover crop in the garden has attracted droves of birds, providing food and shelter for them during these cruddy winter months. My fall brassicas look a little worse for the wear, but I'm still harvesting greens and have plenty of greens to feed my chickens as well. Ditto on the chickweed. It's acting as a green mulch in the garden, and I can pull it up and feed it to my chickens as needed. They love it. Come spring, I'll likely just smother a lot of this out with cardboard and mulch. I hate cleaning up tomatoes, so I've left this planting here kind of as an experiment. I did clean up the rest of my tomato plants. Will I have a million tomato volunteer seedlings in the spring? Probably. Will the vines rot away and make for easier cleanup come spring? Maybe. Can I just plant beans or cucumbers or some other vining crop and let them climb up this trellis without doing any cleanup? I don't know, but we'll find out. I do have areas where I cleaned out summer plantings and either planted cover crop or did a layer of leaf mulch. And I'm sure I will continue to use this method as well because this is very beneficial for the soil. But in general, I'm really feeling like less cleanup is more in my garden. Another success in the garden was more herbs from winter sowing. So 2 years ago, I tried my hand at winter sowing, but I did mostly vegetables and had mixed results. But last year, I decided I was going to focus on winter sowing herbs. So on January 7th, I started Italian parsley, German chamomile, marshmallow, comfrey, valerian, giant Solomon seal, soapwort, Flanders poppy, and skullcap. Now, again, I had some mixed results, but the herbs that seemed to respond the best to winter sowing included the chamomile, and this is actually the second year that I winter sowed chamomile, and it seems to respond better to winter sowing than other methods of planting that I've tried. I was also really happy with the poppies, soapwort, valerian, comfrey, rue, and marshmallow. I'm planning on testing out more herbs this year as well, which reminds me, I have to get those winter sowings started. And of course, I had some big wins in terms of varieties that performed well in the garden this past year, in spite of a pretty cruddy growing season. Be sure to check those out in this video. Now, dun dun dun, on to the failures. Now, I had what I would consider two big major failures in the garden last year. And the first was not planning adequately for weather challenges. It's always anyone's guess as to what the Ohio weather is going to do any given year, but it seemed like this past year was particularly all over the place. We had hot and dry early, followed by a weirdly cool early summer, combined with lots and lots of extremely overcast skies from wildfire smoke, followed by an extremely hot and dry late summer into early fall. We had drought conditions. It just was not real pretty. I muddled by in the early season as best I could, but really screwed up my fall plantings. When I should have been doubling down on shade cloth and drip irrigation, instead I just kept delaying plantings, hoping the weather would cool down a bit. I waited so long that for the first time in a long time, I didn't get any fall cauliflower or broccoli. My plants just did not have enough time to form heads before the days got too short and cold. I've already learned that I have much better success with early and late cool season crops by regularly relying on frost cloth. I suppose I have to learn not to hesitate to reach for the shade cloth either. My other big fail for 2023 was I did exactly what I warned against doing in this video. Trying to do all of the things all the time left me so burnt out that I could do none of the things. My physical and mental health took such a toll that I was basically forced out of the game. My sister-in-law shared a sentiment with me that really hit home in this regard, and I'm paraphrasing, but essentially the idea is, instead of asking ourselves if we have been productive enough to earn a rest, we need to be asking if we are rested enough to produce or perform at the level that we are happy with. And I was not. I just kept working and producing because there's always so much to do. That to-do list as a gardener and a member of society and a mother and a wife just never ever ends. But I felt like I just couldn't stop because I had too much to do. And I don't like to digress much away from the topic of gardening here, but I felt like I wanted to share this because it really was an intrinsic part of my gardening experience this year. And I have a suspicion that there's a lot of you out there that may fall into the same boat. And I just want you to know that it's okay to rest. Even if you have a million things to do in the garden, sometimes the rest is more important than the work. It's going to take a lot for me to change. It's going to be something that I always have to be working on because I'm not very good at relaxing. But after what I went through this past year, I don't want to get to that point again. And I don't want gardening to become something that I dread, something that's a drudgery. So finding a little more balance in the future is a big goal for me. Now, those were the big fails from 23 on my part, but I did have two other, what I would consider disappointments from the 23 gardening season. Those were projects that I really wanted to get done and just did not even make any headway on. And the first was improving my cold weather infrastructure, especially because up until now, it's been so mild here in Ohio that I could have had a lot of stuff still producing in the garden in January. Unfortunately, this frost cover that you see over my carrots was the extent of the cold weather protection that I got done this year. But my dream is to revamp my greenhouse so I can actually use it into the winter months, as well as adding semi-permanent cold frames to my raised beds and utilizing low tunnels more effectively for my in-ground plantings. Eventually, I'd love to add a big greenhouse or high tunnels to the mix, but that's a goal for the future. I also had big dreams for my outdoor mushroom producing plans this past year. I wanted to build a bed for growing wine caps, as well as trying out some shiitake and oyster mushrooms in inoculated logs. And unfortunately, none of that happened. To help ease my disappointment, I'm trying several indoor mushroom growing projects. I've got a Shroom Tech mushroom bag going right now, and I'm going to be trying out North Spore's new automated boomer bin with blue oysters and chestnut mushrooms very soon. But I'm hoping to give outdoor fungi production a real go in 2024. So that wraps up my successes and failures from the 23 gardening season. And I'd love to hear from you. What worked well in your garden and what will you be changing for next year? And what did you learn? Drop a line in the comments below and let me know. And if you enjoyed today's video, please consider subscribing to my channel, Growfully with Jenna. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.